Great. Welcome everyone to Florida Friendly Landscaping for Snowbirds. We have just about a minute, looks like, until 10:30. So we'll give people just another minute to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to attempt to share my screen right now. Hopefully that'll work. Oops. Okay. And if anyone has any questions, please type your questions into the chat today, and I will try to address some of them as we go. And if not, then I will definitely address them all at the end. And also, if you'd like to be sent a recording of this fairly quickly within the next, well, by the end of the week, I would say, please type in your email address as well into the chat, and then we'll make sure that we get that to you. I hope everyone is having a much better 2021 so far. I know I am. It's going to be a better year. All right, it is now 10:30, so we will go ahead and get started with our presentation today. I'm Susan Griffith, and I am the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Coordinator here at UF-IFAS Extension Manatee County. And today, of course, our topic is Florida Friendly Landscaping, specifically for snowbirds. So we're going to be talking with you today about plants that will look their best during the times that you are actually here, and typically in the winter months. And also, first of all, we'll talk just briefly about the importance of Florida friendly landscaping for everyone, and what the 9 principles actually are. And then we'll launch into the plants. And then near the end, we'll talk more about palms, because I realized after speaking with a lot of either new residents or snowbirds that palms are kind of a mystifying subject for a lot of people, especially if you're from really, the far north. You're really very unfamiliar with palms, and that can lead to a lot of mishaps with palms, shall we say. So we'll talk about palms, and then we'll talk a little bit more about proper design and that sort of thing. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to try to minimize myself so I don't have to look at myself. And let's see if I can get this to move. Let's see. Nope, it's not moving. Okay. Let me stop my share, and I'll go back and reshare and see if I can get this one to move. Okay, so one of the reasons, of course, why Florida friendly landscaping is so very important is because of our exploding population growth that we have in Florida. So we have an estimated around 1,000 new residents arriving in Florida to live every day. And that is, of course, 365,000 new residents per year. We're not a very large state, so it is very taxing on all of our natural resources. And of course, Florida has even surpassed New York State as the 3rd most populous state. The only other 2 states that are close to our population are California and Texas, which of course are enormous in size compared to the size of Florida. And Florida's projected population by the year 2060 is 36 million people. And if you look at this projected land use map for 2060, you can see the differences between now, the developed land versus the undeveloped land, and what that projected use is going to look like. And it equates to about 7 million acres of what is now natural land being converted into urban use. So just that is an area the equivalent to the size of the state of Vermont, to put it into perspective. So there are 9 principles of Florida-friendly landscaping. Number 1, and arguably the most important one, is right plant, right place. Watering efficiently is number 2. Fertilizing appropriately is number 3, also a biggie. Number 4 is mulch. Number 5 is managing yard pests responsibly. Number 6 is providing for wildlife, also very important with this rapid urbanization that we're experiencing. Number 7 is recycling. Number 8 is reducing stormwater runoff, which is also incredibly important for protecting our waterways. And number 9 is protecting the waterfront. Now, of course, before making any changes to your landscapes to try to convert it to becoming more Florida friendly, you will definitely want to check with your HOA. The Florida friendly law does allow you to have a Florida friendly landscape. However, your HOA's or COA's Architectural Review Board will need to sign off on any design changes that you'd like to make. So any client who lives in an HOA community, you're definitely going to want to check first to see what those rules are and get approval before starting any new work. And Florida-friendly landscapes must be maintained looking, not messy. And Florida-friendly landscaping does not mean plant it and forget it, which is a popular misconception. Florida-friendly also does not mean xeriscaping, and it does not mean rock yards. Those are not considered Florida-friendly. Florida-friendly landscapes are beautiful and friendly to the environment because they reduce the use of water, pesticides, and fertilizers by using the appropriate plants in the appropriate places. Here are a few examples of what a beautiful Florida-friendly landscape can look like. As you can see, they are very varied, and it really depends on your taste and your aesthetic sense, how you want your Florida-friendly landscape to look. Many different possibilities. One thing that's very, very important, of course, is your soil. Your soil pH here in Florida is probably going to be a whole lot different than what you have in your home state. Here, the soil tends to be a lot more alkaline. So if you have a pH in your soil of 7, which is considered neutral, that's actually fairly unusual. A lot of them can be in the high 7s and in the 8s, and we've seen some test at 9. So it can be quite alkaline here. It's very rare for us to have soil tested less than 7. It does happen, but usually it's because really old growth oak trees are on the property and they have been shedding their leaves and decomposing and creating almost a compost for the soil that has naturally brought that soil pH down. But most yards don't have that, or a lot of yards don't have that. Especially in newer communities. So definitely the soil tends to be alkaline. So if you have your heart set on having plants like gardenias or azaleas, camellias, hydrangeas for sure, those are plants here in Florida that you are going to want to keep in a pot so that you can completely control the environment that those plants are in. And of course, knowing your USDA planting zone here is very important. We are 9B for most of the county, but the outer edges and the southernmost parts of the county are 10A. So if you live right along the coast, or if you live in the southernmost part of the county, you're going to be more 10A. If you're in the rest of the county, you can see on the map where, let's try to show you with my mouse. Manatee County's here. So the majority of the county you can see here is kind of a true yellow, and then the 10A portion is that more orangey section along the side and the southernmost part. So making appropriate selections of plants based on that zone is very important. You can do it. You can put plants that aren't suited to our climate here, but just know that you will have to spend some time running around with frost cloth protecting those plants, like I do, because there's certain plants that I just must have, and que sera, that's what you have to do. But if you don't want to be bothered with that, you want to really pay attention to that. Also, if you live near the Manatee River, which a lot of people don't realize is brackish water, or even in that general neighborhood, or near the bay, of course, you could have salt spray. So certainly if you live on the island, you're aware of this, but a lot of people don't realize that even parts of the Braden River have very high salinity. So in storms, this can translate into salt spray all over your plants, causing damage to them if they're not salt tolerant species. And also it's very common if you have well water in areas like this, that there can be salt water intrusion into your well water. So, and that can actually be more damaging to your plants. Some people wonder why all their plants are dying. It's possibly because of saltwater intrusion into your well water. And you don't have salt tolerant plants in your landscape. So that can be a very expensive redesign of your whole landscape when that occurs. There are plenty of plants though that are salt tolerant, however, to be able to fix that. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the plants that bloom during this time of year and that look their best during the winter and spring season. When I say winter, we're kind of talking November through January, and then you know, the end of January, February, March, April is really our spring. Okay, so tropical sage is a beautiful native plant. It's a wildflower. It does bloom year-round, and there's red and pink flowering ones shown here, but there's also a white flowering form of it. And these are available from our local native plant nurseries, as are the other native plants that you'll see today. Calanco is another one that blooms in the wintertime, and it is a succulent, so it needs very little water or care. It definitely prefers drier conditions. It will rebloom seasonally, and its bloom time is generally winter and spring, and it will bloom in the shade or part shade, and it can attract hummingbirds. This one is a non-native plant, but it's considered Florida friendly. Another non-native is Dianthus. Sweet William is shown here, and it likes drier conditions. It blooms in the winter and spring. It's non-native. It will not like to be in an area that's heavily irrigated, and it does like to have well-draining soil conditions, so keep that in mind. It's definitely one of these that will not survive summer here. Here is a native plant, Lobelia Fluoridana, and it blooms in the winter. It is a short-lived perennial. It will probably reseed itself for the following season. They are rather tall and slim, so they look better when planted with darker plants behind them that are fuller to set them off. It does need wetter soil, so low spots and ditches are a great place for this plant, and it does attract butterflies. Another lobelia has the same needs. It likes a much wetter spot than a lot of plants do. So again, good for low spots or ditches where you'd like to beautify a ditch. Ditches are not very attractive generally, but you can make them pretty if you put the proper plants in them and kind of turn them into more of a rain garden. It attracts hummingbirds, this one. Zenia Elegans, they are one of the few plants that you can order from a seed catalog that goes nationwide, and they will actually perform very well in Florida. You can't say that about most of the plants in seed catalogs. They are very low maintenance, they need little water. They have really outstanding combinations of color and texture. They're non-native, but they will attract wildlife. A sweet Alyssum is another one that is a winter standout here in Florida. It's a low-growing, very cold, hardy perennial. It does look best in winter, and you should probably cut it back before you leave to go up north. It may or may not survive depending on its location, but it makes a nice border plant, and it makes a nice ground cover here in Florida. Geraniums are another cold, hardy, beautiful plant that really will not survive in the summer here at all, but it will thrive here in the winter months. So you can plant it in November. Definitely plan to replace it before June hits, because it's not going to be very happy in June. They come in virtually every color under the sun. And there's also this really beautiful trailing type that looks great in hanging baskets. And that's the ivy geranium. Snapdragons are another one that is a winter Florida thriver, but will definitely not survive summer here. They also now come in deeper colors like burgundy and lipstick red, in addition to the more pastel palette here. Non-native, but considered Florida friendly. Petunias are another one that will absolutely not live here in the summer months, or the hot months, our 7 months of summer that we have, basically. So plan to plant in late October and plan to remove definitely before May, and just treat it as a winter annual, just like all the other ones that I've mentioned so far. And pansies, same thing. Those of you from up north are familiar with this, I'm sure, very well, because it does have a really high tolerance to cold. So it will survive here, but only in the coldest months of the year here. Ornamental cabbages and kale are a very interesting addition to landscapes. While being technically edible, they're a little bitter, so I wouldn't really eat them, but they are very interesting looking and can be really nice additions to your landscape. Just be sure to remove before it gets hot. Here's one of my favorites, the tractor seat plant, Farfugium Japonicum. Even the name is fun. It has these wonderful leaves that look like a tractor seat, but then all of a sudden in the winter, it blooms with these gorgeous clusters of yellow, happy-looking, daisy-like flowers. So it is really very cheerful on a dreary winter day. We don't have very many of those here, but occasionally we will. This morning was kind of dreary, so I was very happy to see my Farfugium Japonicum blooming outside today. Never plant this plant in full sun. It will not be happy. This one is a shade lover, and it will even bloom really well for you in full shade. It makes a great ground cover plant because it doesn't get terribly tall. The flowers definitely can shoot up a few feet up, but the plant itself is very kind of mounding growth habit and very low and spreading. So for shady locations, it really does make an excellent, excellent ground cover. And there's also a variegated form of it, which is often called the leopard plant. Bougainvillea is one of the best plants for winter here in Florida. It thrives in dry, cool conditions, which is typically what we have here all winter long into spring. And it definitely prefers not to have regular irrigation. It's considered a vining shrub. And if you've ever owned one of the typical ones, you'll notice that you definitely need to have it supported because it does have that vining habit. It needs support. There are some dwarf cultivars now on the market, that stay lower and get to be only about a few feet high. And those actually have fewer thorns too, which is another great bonus about it. And there is actually a tree form of Bougainvillea that also has very few thorns, and it is actually fragrant as well. And that one is Bougainvillea arborea. And Torch Glow is an example of a fuchsia thornless shrub. And when I say thornless, that just means that they're not going to have these gigantic spines that attack you like the other ones. Even the ones that are considered thornless still have a little bit of thorn to them, but it's not going to be those really intimidating giant spines like a lot of the older cultivar or the older varieties have. All right, lion's ear is another one. This guy gets to be about 5 feet high and just stops, about 5 feet tall and about 3 feet wide. And it kind of maintains this rounded appearance on its own, which is nice. It doesn't need a lot of care. It blooms for months on end. This one actually blooms really from like the end of summer, early fall, all the way through spring. It does need full sun to bloom prolifically. And it thrives in dry areas with just occasional irrigation once it's established. It's non-native, but it does help to support hummingbirds. King's Mantle is kind of an old garden favorite here in Florida. It's been in the state for many, many years. It has definitely proven itself not to be an invasive species because it's been used really since the turn of the century, really, in gardens. Native bumblebees love this plant. It's very fun to watch them try to get their fat bodies into the flowers to feed. It is a non-native, but it is very Florida friendly. It blooms for most of the year. Peak bloom tends to be around December, but then it does have sporadic blooms throughout the year. So you can really kind of count on it for blooming most of the year. It hardly needs pruning. It's another one that really maintains a 6 foot by 6 foot shape. And if you can have a plant that size, you'll have little pruning to do with this one. It does prefer some shade. So an area like the north or the east side of your home would be better for this guy rather than full on sun, definitely. They just don't look very good. They get very pale and kind of sickly looking if they're in too much sun. Red fire spike. This particular one is the red one in the picture, and it is definitely a hummingbird attractor and also attracts butterflies, other pollinators. It's an easy to grow shrub that needs little attention at all. Grows up to being about 6 feet tall as well. And it's unusual because it blooms all through fall and winter into spring, a really long bloom period during snowbird season. And it definitely looks best in partial shade. It's non-native, but Florida friendly. And it also has this more fuchsia colored bloom, which is also really nice. This one has all the same attributes as far as bloom time goes and needs, although this one is always blooming a little bit later than the red. So like red generally starts, like I said, like fall. This one is really pretty much December. This one starts to bloom, but then it blooms all through the spring. And then there's a purple one as well, a pale purple. And it has slightly different foliage and it blooms a good deal later than the other two. This one definitely starts blooming in the spring, and it actually needs slightly more water than the others. So keep that in mind if you end up with one of these. All right, azaleas are another one that really look their best, generally speaking, in the winter and spring, depending on the species or the cultivars that you're talking about. Duchess of Cyprus here on the left blooms late fall to spring, and the very popular Formosa that has been an old garden favorite forever. It blooms in true spring, pretty much always starting around February, March, with March being its peak bloom time. Now, azaleas definitely do have special needs when it comes to the soil pH. So that's why you see them oftentimes planted under oak trees. So like I mentioned, areas that have oak trees have much lower pH generally. If they have these grand old oaks that have been there for centuries in some cases, dropping those leaves, it tends to modify the pH and it keeps it low and ideal for azaleas. Azaleas also really prefer to have a good deal of shade. So that's why under oaks is ideal. If you'd like to have more information about azaleas, this is a good UF publication. They're listed below. They actually have a really nice chart with bloom times and all the different varieties of azaleas. We also have native azaleas here in Florida, and the spring flowering, beautiful Florida pinkster is just spectacular when it blooms, as is the Florida flame, which has that nice orangey yellow colored flowers. And again, same conditions really are required for these guys. Shadier, a little more moist, and definitely more acidic than a lot of other plants, and they'll be happy. Red powder puff is really spectacular this time of year. It blooms in most of the months of the year, but in the wintertime, it really starts pumping out these beautiful flowers. It has really high drought tolerance once established, and this is one of those plants where you can pretty much plant it anywhere and it will thrive. It does become either a large shrub or it can be trained into being a small tree if you'd prefer. It gets up to about 15 feet high, this particular species. And there's also a pink and white flowering cultivar as well. Another great plant that blooms pretty much in November all the way through late December is Dombaya Seminole. And this one is a large shrub. It can get up to about 15 feet high, but it can be maintained at a lower height if desired. It does have a tendency to be cold sensitive below 40 degrees. So just be careful where you're planting it. If you're in an area that is a little colder, if you don't have a protected area, you may end up having to cover this plant, especially while it's establishing. It does have these beautiful upward facing blooms that are reminiscent of a hydrangea, and it's often called the tropical rose hydrangea. Another Dombaya, this one is Dombaya Wallickii, and this is a gorgeous small tree. It gets up to about 25 feet tall by about 20 feet wide. And it's another one that can definitely be cold sensitive below 40 degrees. So you'll definitely want to protect it, or perhaps abstain from it if you live in a very cold area. It starts to bloom in late December, right after the other Dombaya finishes its November to December bloom. This one pretty much immediately goes into bloom, and it blooms sometimes through February and sometimes later on. Sometimes you'll see them blooming even into March. The beautiful clustered pink ball blossoms just are pendulous. They hang down like ornaments off of it, unlike the Seminole that faces upward. And these guys have a scent that is very much like birthday cake. And you'll just see them buzzing with bees. The honeybees particularly really love them. And I like to watch bees. That's just kind of one of my hobbies, I think. So I enjoy this plant very much when it's in bloom. Here's a beautiful native tree that goes into its full bloom in the spring, just when its leaves begin to grow back. So it is a deciduous one, and it produces a fruit that's very attractive to birds, which is very important. It's always nice to include at least 1 or 2 native trees on your property to support the wildlife. It's very easy care, and it is really one of those trees that's underused in the landscape. The Hong Kong orchid, this is one of the most spectacular trees. I just want to caution you to be sure, if you do end up purchasing one of these, make sure that you do get this particular Bougainvillea Wallickiana, which is sterile. Otherwise, they tend to be invasive and really just troublesome. Pesty and dropping seed pods and their seeds everywhere. This one is sterile. It does not produce seed pods, and it is just an absolute stunner during this time of the year. If you've been driving around maybe Lakewood Ranch recently and you've seen a really striking purple blooming tree here and there, this is probably what it is. It does peak bloom in the winter, and it's over 100 days peak bloom, so it's pretty unusual. It gets to be about 20 to 40 feet tall with a 25-foot spread, so just be sure that you give it ample space so it can get that full sun and and space that it needs to grow. All right, another native is the Flatwoods plum, Prunus Ambaleta. This beautiful native plum, it's another deciduous one. So its bloom time is going to come in the winter, right as it's barely starting to regrow its leaves after losing them in the winter. It has fruit that is edible to humans, but it does range wildly. Some of it can be very sweet, some of it can be very, very sour. So it's one of those fruits that's really ideal for making jelly from. And then you don't have to be overly cautious about what the flavor is of each fruit. If they're all mixed together, it's just a delicious jam or jelly. This one, unlike the Chickasaw plum, this particular species sends up very few suckers, whereas some of the other ones can really sucker quite a great deal, which is probably too much trouble for most people. But this one is very, very few suckers come up. They do have thorns, so keep that in mind, but it is an excellent wildlife plant. The plants that have thorns and fruit on them are generally considered the best for the birds. And this particular one also is a host plant for tent caterpillars, which are excellent for keeping bird populations happy. It definitely grows best in more of an afternoon shade location rather than a really hot afternoon sun location. And this one really would benefit from some irrigation or just a generally wetter site. It's more of an understory tree, so it prefers to grow in a little bit of shade from much taller trees around it, such as pines and things like that. All right, the yellow trumpet tree. This is formerly called Tabebuia. You may have heard the name Tabebuia over the years. They've actually changed it now. They've reclassified it as Androanthus now. So the yellow one is Androanthus chrysanthus, and it is a medium tree. It gets to be about 30 feet max, so pretty manageable size. Very easy care once established, and it does have these beautiful, prolific yellow blooms that cover it in the spring. Here's a native grass, muley grass, that blooms pretty much in late fall. You'll see it in, generally speaking, peak bloom all through November, sometimes in December. I just saw some that were still in bloom, so it depends. Mine I have at home are very early bloomers, and they're completely finished by the end of November. But it does vary, I guess, by site, or by plant, I guess, too. They are extremely tolerant of both drought and flooding. This is an ideal plant if you have any issues with erosion or anything like that. This is a great plant to use to try to mitigate that. And after it blooms, the seeds attract birds, and beneficial insects such as ladybugs like to live in native grasses, as do rabbits. The rabbits will not eat it, so you may not want to attract rabbits to your yard if you live in an area that has a lot of rabbits, because rabbits can definitely be problematic. All right, this is a beautiful native vine that looks its best in the wintertime. It blooms fall through winter with these really kind of true blue flowers, which are rather unusual, as you know, in nature. They're definitely on the blue spectrum rather than the red spectrum of purple. And of course, being a vine, it does need a trellis or an arbor to support it, but it is one of these well-behaved vines that does not go crazy and want to take over your whole property, the way some of them definitely will try to do. And it is actually endangered in the wild. So it is nice if you can introduce this nice native vine into your landscape. We'll try to help keep it alive. Another vine that is a well-behaved vine that has attractive flowers this time of year is the black-eyed Susan vine, Thunbergia alata. This one sometimes has all yellow flowers, sometimes a mix of kind of an orangey, like a pale orangey, and sometimes white, and sometimes all of them on one plant, depending on who's growing it and who's selling it. It does better in, well, I wouldn't say it does better. It's more vigorous in full sun, but you can definitely grow it in shade as well. It, of course, being a vine, it will climb, so you'll need to give it something to climb onto. If you don't give it something to climb onto, it will climb up the nearest tree, but it's not going to be one of those obnoxious vines that ends up smothering your whole entire tree. It's really very well behaved for a vine, and this one is a non-native. Another plant that really bears mention is the bromeliad, because it looks good all year long, and you can really create kind of a jewel box of colors in your yard using bromeliads of different types. Some of them really need to have a great deal of shade to perform well. Others thrive in really hot, full sun locations. So it's one of those where you really have to know what you're buying for that particular site condition. But they're great because they can actually grow on an old log. They can grow on top of a boulder. They don't need really ideal soil conditions. They're one of the few plants, being an epiphyte, that, you know, an air plant, really, that they can grow on top of soil rather than having to be dependent upon the quality of the soil. So if you have challenging yard conditions, this is a great plant to use. All right, we will talk about palms a little bit. As I mentioned, if you're from an area of the country where palms are not common, you may be mystified by palms. They may be these exotic things that you really are not familiar with, really don't know much about. So we'll just do kind of a brief Palms 101. We'll talk about different species. We'll talk about things that are native. We'll talk about palm diseases. There are a lot of palm diseases out there that you need to be aware of. Because most of us, let's face it, we definitely have a palm or two in our yards because it's Florida. So most importantly, palms are not trees. Even though you may hear the term palm tree, palms are definitely not trees. It's a misnomer. Palms are more closely related to grasses and bamboo and other monocots, and they are not dicots like trees. So they do not have the same healing mechanisms like trees do. Trees are able to kind of compartmentalize and heal, whereas palms cannot do that. Palms cannot heal themselves. So an injury, a wound to a palm can sometimes become fatal. And you definitely don't want to ever wound a palm because the wound will invite infection by insects or by diseases. So this was a well-intentioned campaign of happiness that a gentleman was trying to spread happiness around by hanging up these lovely signs. Very well-intentioned, but he was unfortunately pounding them into palm trees. So who knows how many palm trees may have lost their lives in the happiness campaign. But unfortunately, if only he had used the electrical pole, the telephone pole next to it, that's also wood, but not a living plant, it would have been much better. Okay, so most people kind of assume, I think, that all of the palm species that we have in Florida that are common are probably native palms, but actually there are only 12 species of palms that are actually native to Florida. So the vast majority of palms that you see are not native to Florida. They are from Asia, they're from South America, they're from all over the world. And this is one example, our really ubiquitous non-native pygmy date palm, Phoenix robelini, is native to southern parts of Asia. The 12 native Florida palm trees that we do have are the needle palm, the Sable Palmetto, the dwarf palmetto, the cabbage palm or sable palm, the scrub palmetto, and the Miami palm. And those two, the scrub palmetto and the Miami palm, are actually the only two palms that are endemic to Florida. So Florida is the only place that they live, that they exist in the world. But unfortunately, the Miami palm may now be extinct in the wild, really due to habitat loss. And the silver palm, Cocothrinax argentata, is another one. The Buccaneer palm, the Key thatch palm, the Florida thatch palm, the Perotis palm, and the royal palm. Those are the only native palms to Florida. And most of them are not used very commonly. Some of them, it's because of their zone requirements. As you can see, a lot of them start at 10A here. But of course, things are getting warmer, and that is certainly not preventing people from using royal palms everywhere. I see them out east of I-75 all the time. So, you know, as I said, things are getting warmer, so you can kind of push those zones a little bit more than we used to be able to do. So sable palmettos oftentimes have these spiky boots on the trunk. That's a good way to identify that as a sable palmetto. Some of the plants shed them with age and some don't. The sable palmetto is the Florida state tree, which isn't that just like Florida with all its quirkiness. The state tree, of course, is not really a tree. It's also called a cabbage palm. And it's called that because the heart of the palm can actually be eaten as food, and used to be eaten very commonly by early settlers. But unfortunately, this does kill the palm. a lot of people don't like the look of the boots, and they actually pay someone to come in and physically remove them. The word boots for these protrusions is actually a colloquialism from the early settlers of Florida, who would hang their boots on them at their campsites at night to prevent snakes from nesting in them and then getting a very unpleasant surprise in the morning. When they're young, they look like this. On the left, there's no visible trunk at all yet. On the right, there's about a foot or so of trunk visible. They're pretty slow growers. It takes them a while to get that trunk on them. They look very, very much like these other common native dwarf sable species, the Sable Miner, which is also called the dwarf blue stem palmetto, which is a lovely small statured palm that gets only up to about 8 feet by 8 feet maximum size. And the Sable Etonia, which is one of those that's endemic to Florida, which only gets to be about 6 feet tall by 6 feet wide maximum. So if you're looking for a nice small palm, these are really ideal. Another native, very commonly used palm is the Sable Palmetto, Serenoa repens. This form here in the picture is the silver form of it, which is actually more common on the east coast of Florida in the wild, but it is, of course, cultivated in nurseries now, so you can buy this anywhere now. You can buy this at our local native plant nurseries. And you can always tell it apart from the others if you just touch the petioles. The petioles are the stems that attach the frond, and they have finely serrated teeth on them. So you don't want to touch, you want to touch it a little gingerly. Let's put it that way, so it doesn't attack you. Here's a question for you. Did you know that you should never remove green or yellow palm fronds? I bet you probably didn't know that unless you've taken a class here at Extension before. Palms are unique in that they retain a lot of the food that they need in their fronds, so they continue to feed from them even when they turn yellow. So never take them off when they're yellow. Even just let them stay until they are crispy brown before you remove them. And palms with green crown shafts, like the Adenidia palm shown here, or Christmas palm, it's commonly called. See that green crown shaft there? That's an indicator in the palm world that is a self-cleaning palm. So you should never trim those off. They will self-shed. So cutting them can only cause them detriment. Adenidia foxtail palms, another common palm in Florida, both of which are non-native, but the royal native palm that becomes quite a massive specimen. They are all examples of self-cleaning palms that shed their own fronds, plant palms that have green crown shafts. Most palms are over pruned. You really want to cut them no higher than 9 3 on a clock. Basically, you don't want to cut above that. So the bottom of the fronds should hang like a 9 3 on a clock. That is ideal. And here's a nice Edis Ifis UF publication on palms. Areca palms are very, very common here. That is because they make excellent privacy screens. They're often planted as such. They are non-native. They are self-cleaning, which means they will shed when they're ready. The common name is yellow palm because they often turn kind of yellowish in full sun locations. It's also called cane palm, is another common name, because with age they do develop these tall canes. They are a true clumping palm, so they will continue to clump out horizontally, excuse me, as well as shooting up these vertical growing canes. If you prefer to have it be more of a tight, thick clump of them, you can always come in and saw out the taller canes that become more bare, and that will encourage more growth from the bottom to make them more bushy. They're very inexpensive palms, and this has contributed to their overuse. And really, when there's overuse of any particular single thing, it can contribute to disease spread in populations. So these guys are really well known for having Ganoderma, which is a palm disease I'll talk more about here. It's known as Ganoderma Butt Rot. You will probably never forget that name, right? It does produce these conchs that are like shelf mushrooms that protrude from the trunks of the palms. They can kind of be low, close to the ground. As you can see in the picture on the left, they're really at grass level. They are very commonly spread by like weed whackers that, you know, an unsuspecting landscape person is going from plant to plant, and nicking into the palm, unfortunately, as they go. Remember I said how they don't heal. So any wound that's given to a palm is going to remain open, and that leaves it very susceptible to anything getting in there. And then if the person goes from one infected palm to the other with an unwashed tool, which, let's face it, they're not going to sit there and clean and disinfect between every plant that they touch, it can be spread very easily this way. It can also be spread via airborne spores because they are mushrooms. So they are definitely going to be projecting spores out into the environment. That's why it's very important, if you're not going to have the plant removed absolutely immediately as soon as you discover it, which really you should, because they become very dangerous, actually. They can fall on your car, they can fall on your home. Once they have the disease, you don't know what the progression of disease has done to the inside of the palm. And so it can make it very vulnerable to tipping over and causing a lot of damage. So it is definitely recommended, if you see these on any palms in your community, or definitely in your own landscape, to remove the palm immediately. But if you can't do it that same day, you're definitely going to want to remove the conchs, and you want to seal them up in a plastic bag, to make sure that you don't release those spores all over the community. So here's what they look like in the beginning, and when they're mature, and when they're old. So they definitely have different appearances. In the very beginning, it actually looks like someone threw a ball of putty onto the trunk, right? You would never really know that that was a dangerous palm disease or this weird mushroom. One really important thing to note is not only should they be removed very swiftly, but also you can never plant another palm in that same spot or close by where the one with this disease was removed. The fungal disease stays in the soil for many years. We don't know exactly how many years, but it's quite a few years. So really, any palm should not be planted there, and most palms are susceptible to this disease. And even leaving the stump there, you can see this person had the tree taken out, but the stump remained. Well, the conchs just populated on top of that stump. So that is still just as much of a problem, even though it's not going to do property damage at this stage. It's going to continue to spread the disease throughout the community. So really, you need to really have the stump ground out. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly removing conchs from that stump. Another very common disease of palms, unfortunately, is lethal bronzing, which is also generally fatal. It's usually not diagnosed until it's too late. There is a treatment, a kind of a tetracycline, like an antibiotic that you can give the healthy ones that are nearby, as long as they don't have it yet. But it does really no good if the palm already has it. And you can see it can really knock out palms pretty quickly. The older, lower leaves are affected first, and the disease progresses upward. It is actually not spread by pruning tools, but it is spread by a tiny little insect called a leaf hopper. And it is a phytoplasmic bacteria that can only live within the palm or the insect. So plant or insects such as leaf hoppers are very efficient vectors for spreading this particular disease. All right, here are those common green crown shaft self-cleaning palms I was talking about before. The foxtail, the Adenidia, and the royal. The royals can be a little scary with that self-cleaning feature. You really want to be careful where you plant one, because it has such enormous fronds and they fall at such a high elevation. They can be 70 feet tall. So again, they can do some damage to cars below if it happens to fall. One thing that's important to note is that native palms are adapted to our soil conditions in Florida, and they really don't need a strict fertilizer regimen that the non-native palms really require. So if you plant something like the native Sable Miner on the left, that's going to be a really easy care palm for you. If you plant something a little flashier, like the huge non-native Bismarckia nobilis, which a lot of people fall in love with, but it does need regular fertilizer. Okay, the queen palm. Queen palms are so common that everyone kind of assumes that they are also native palms. They are definitely not. They are non-native. They are native to South America, and they are actually considered caution invasive species here now. So if you happen to have one, they can definitely be managed for their invasiveness by removing their fruit that they produce prolifically. Large orange fruit. So when you see that appear, it's best to remove that and dispose of it properly, and that will help to curtail some of the invasive tendencies of this palm. Non-native palms can definitely be higher maintenance and really must be maintained with a fertilizer regimen regularly with a proper fertilizer. That's a very important distinction that I'm making right now, because it's actually better to not fertilize palms at all than it is to use really poor quality or the wrong type of fertilizer on them. So there are specific fertilizers that are really formulated for palms, and here is what the University of Florida experts recommend. They recommend that they're fertilized 3 times per year with an 8-0-12 plus 4 magnesium with micronutrients. Sometimes the 8-0-12 is not available locally, unfortunately, because that is the ideal fertilizer to use within the confines of our Manatee County Fertilizer Ordinance, which requires a 0 middle number there. But the next best thing, unfortunately, sometimes you have to go with this one. If the 8-0-12 is not available, they may have the 8-2-12 available. So it's a specific palm fertilizer, like I said, that has 100% of its nitrogen, its potassium, and its magnesium in controlled release form. And the micronutrients, such as the iron and the manganese, are in water soluble sulfate or chelated iron-only form. So it's very specific, as you can see. And for more information on that, I would highly recommend visiting this site and looking at this document below here. I'll leave this up for a minute. This is very important information regarding the proper fertilization of your palms. Another really important thing to know about palms is the myth of the hurricane cut. You may occasionally have some guy in a truck driving around asking everyone in your neighborhood if they'd like to have their palms hurricane cut to prepare for storm season. Definitely say no to this. These are not horticulturists. They're not arborists. It is a guy trying to make a quick buck at the expense of your palms. This is the worst possible thing that you could possibly do to your palms. It is a bad practice, and it's very detrimental to the health and the longevity of the palm. And it will definitely do the opposite as far as protecting it in a storm. It's much more likely to perish in a storm if it's hurricane cut. Also, as I said before, you're not supposed to remove the green fronds, right? Or even the yellow fronds. Well, this is just scalping it and removing all of these fronds. So it's setting it up for all of these nutritional deficiencies as well, which also weaken it. So just remember that rule with palm pruning: remove only brown. And a little word about irrigation here. We generally recommend that if you have a well-established landscape, you can pretty much turn off your irrigation for the summer. If you're never here in the summer, you may not realize that it rains every single day, major drenching downpours, pretty much every single day for the entire summer. So I would definitely consider turning off your irrigation system if you currently leave it on for the summer. It's just wasting our most precious resource if it's left on. It's just not needed. Do always have a backup plan, however, in the form of a neighbor or an irrigation person who can turn it on and off in your absence, just in case we have a strange weather anomaly. Really consider limiting your lawns. A heavily maintained turf grass tends to be one of the largest consumers of both water and chemicals like fertilizers and pesticides in the landscape. And this can run off in the form of pollutants, which not only affect our drinking water supply, but also can definitely contribute to unpleasant algal blooms in waterways, lakes and ponds especially. So consider replacing these large swaths of heavily maintained turf grass, particularly in areas where it does poorly, and replace it with drought-tolerant, native, and Florida-friendly plants that need little care and much less irrigation once they are established. In most cases, zero irrigation once they're established. Mulch is an extremely important part of Florida-friendly landscaping, but like everything else, it needs to be done properly in order to be effective. So the main mistake that people make with mulch is that they put it too close to the center of the plant, too close to the trunks of trees, too close to the main runner of a shrub. You don't want to be close to the center. You want to make sure that you leave the root zone basically exposed. 3 to 4 inches of mulch, really 3 is generally adequate. And we do definitely recommend 3 particular types of mulches over all the others. Flora Mulch, pine bark, and pine straw are the 3 that we highly recommend. We don't recommend using cypress mulch. It kills native beneficial cypress trees. It's not a sustainable product. And mixed hardwood mulches, these are often the mulches that you'll see that are dyed the red color or dyed brown or dyed black. These mixed hardwood mulches often use scrap woods that are possibly from treated wood, from pallets and things like that. or pressure treated wood that often have chemicals that are environmentally damaging. So we do not recommend their use either. Mulch is extremely important for all of these different reasons. It conserves soil moisture, it adds nutrients to the soil, it protects against soil erosion, it reduces weed growth, it provides habitat for beneficial soil organisms, it can improve your landscape's appearance greatly, and it can provide ground cover in areas where virtually no plants will ever grow. Here's an example of good mulching versus bad mulching. You want to expose your trunk flare here. As you can see, a lot of trees, you can't see this, and you really should be able to see this on all your trees. You want to mulch to your drip line or beyond, and you want to avoid this at all costs. No volcano mulching. It's a very, very bad practice, very, very detrimental to the health and welfare of your trees. And this is what Flora Mulch looks like. Flora Mulch is made from invasive Melaleuca trees. So it's a really sustainable product that is really helping to combat the invasive Melaleuca problem in South Florida. Pine straws are just pine needles, so that's a really great product as well. And pine bark is the bark off of pine trees. When you're going to be redoing areas of your landscape, you can start by planning it out and sketching the area for your space and your light patterns. And you definitely don't have to be an artist to work on designing your own landscape. Simplistic drawings are very effective. So you just want to do a very basic sketch of your home and your yard itself, and be sure to include where the light is located at different times of day. As you can see here, it says full morning, afternoon sun, over here, full evening sun. You also want to indicate where the constantly shady areas are. Also, you'd want to point out where your power lines are, or other areas that are of concern that may constrain your ability to plant a tall tree or a palm that will grow really tall with age. Then you can start drawing in your plants, and you don't have to be an artist. Again, like I say, you don't have to draw it perfectly. Just a basic shape with vague plant shapes is fine. Always research your plants very well in advance and go with what works in your zone of the county. Which would be either 9B or 10A, depending on your location. If you're in the majority of the county, more toward the center, you're going to be 9B. If you're on the outskirts, near the coast, and near the south part of the county, you'd be more 10A. So just draw these vague plant shapes and have a key for which is which. And then consider having your soil tested here at the Manatee County Extension Service. We charge a nominal fee for testing for pH and soluble salts. And another really important thing is to not make impulse plant purchases. No matter how interesting and beautiful a plant may be, it's very tempting, I know, to have an impulse buy of a gorgeous plant when you're standing in line and gazing at it at the big box store. But really, they can sell invasive species still in stores. So you want to know what you're getting. You don't want to impulse purchase plants. Encourage plant diversity is another really important part of landscaping the Florida-friendly way. You want to have a really good diversity, a lot of different species. And when you're just getting started, these are things to keep in mind. Make sure to put the right plant in the right place based on your site conditions. Water conservatively, fertilize carefully, incorporate some native plants, and encourage others to do the same. Here are some additional FFL resources for adopting Florida-friendly landscapes, a step-by-step for converting. And here is a searchable database with color photos, a plant list, and interactive yard for easy design. If you require additional landscape assistance, we have a free program called the Landscape Assistance Program here at Manatee County Extension, and we can help you with that. We do not do landscape design, but we will definitely make plant recommendations based on your site conditions. We do recommend that you do test your soil prior to meeting with us so that we know where you're at. A site sketch of your property is very helpful. The location of your property and the size and ID of all of your existing plants. So photos of your property are really important. Any structural features, your moisture and light patterns in your yard. But if you can bring us all of that, then we're happy to help make some recommendations for you. We also have a plant diagnostic clinic here. Our Master Gardener volunteers staff it, delivering wonderful customer service for all of your plant questions. And they are here Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. It is closed on Wednesdays. And they're there from 9 until 4. And we're located at 1303 17th Street West, Palmetto. And that's where you also bring your soil samples to have it tested. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me at sjgriffith@ufl.edu. We're always happy to help you. And everyone have a safe and happy 2021. Thank you.